what it means to grieve. I have been preparing a lecture for tonight for my students and for my practitioners on the idea of grieving and grief and loss. Some of you might have heard of the famous author and expert on grieving, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She's written a book called On Death and Dying, and in it she describes the various stages of grieving. So grieving isn't something where you get over what your loss is in a short period of time. And I was very fortunate to have read this book many years ago when I was still a GP. So I volunteered to accompany people in their terminal illness, and I made it my business to learn about the stages of dying. And of course, the first stage of dying, the first thing to happen to you when you are given the bad news that you might have cancer or that somebody you know has died, the first response is one of shock. And that's a very normal response, and it's called a phase of denial. You actually you can't believe. You say to yourself, "I just can't believe it's true," and that's how it feels. It feels completely unbelievable. It's not easy for us as human beings to take on board something as serious as a loss of a dear friend or the imminent loss from cancer of a partner, for example. So the denial phase, or in neurological terms, I would call it frozen. You're actually neurologically frozen, disconnected. Frozen means disconnected from your feelings. That stage can last for quite a long time, actually. It can last for weeks and weeks and weeks. And when I was a doctor accompanying people through terminal illness, the patient themselves and the relatives sometimes would stay in that phase of disbelief, waiting for good news, waiting for something else to happen, never believing it's going to happen. And they might even do that all the way through. So the phase of shock and disbelief goes on for quite a long time. But if the person naturally comes out of that, the next phase they go through is the phase of connecting with their feelings about what's happened. And when you've lost somebody, you have a range of feelings. You have anger, you have sadness, deep sadness, and so on. And so I'm sharing this because I'm sure everybody on a call will be knowing somebody at some point in their lives that will be experiencing a loss or an imminent death of a loved one. And really the best way to support them is to allow them to express their emotions. If people aren't held in that space, if people feel, "Oh, I can't cry, I shouldn't trouble somebody with my tears or my sadness, it's too much, it's too overwhelming," if that's the approach, then sadly what happens is the person pushes the feelings down and they stay in your body for years. If you can't express them, you can't have a good cry. And, the person may say to you, "Oh, but if I start crying, I'll never stop. It feels like it's uncontrollable, unconsolable." That's just the feeling. In actual fact, our bodies are not built that way. Our bodies are built to express an emotion up to the peak of a curve till it gets as intense, and then it suddenly comes down again. So emotions come in waves, all right? Everything in nature, including us, is wave-like. If you just have to think of pregnancy and labor, childbirth isn't one long painful contraction until the baby is born. It's rising to a peak of pain as the uterus contracts, and then it goes off again, and you have the in-between time to rest. So our bodies are built and designed to express things, to feel emotion, especially in waves. So not to be afraid of the emotions and not to be afraid to support them. Really, please don't give people the advice that you really need to be getting over this now. It's time to get back to work, or it's time to distract yourself. When I had an awful loss when I was a young mother, I lost a baby. And my partners at the practice decided that it would be best for me to get me back to the hospital work as soon as possible. They didn't want to see me sitting around at home crying, so they got me a job, and guess where they got me a job? On the pediatric ward. They thought that would distract me and that would help me to feel a little bit better if I could pick up babies on a hospital ward. And to be perfectly honest, it was the most shocking experience I could have gone into. It really wasn't very helpful at all, both denying my grief and then being put in close proximity to the very thing I'd lost. So we don't do very well as a culture around grieving, and if any of you are up against any grief, I would suggest you bought the book. It's available online. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on Death and Dying. She's written more than one book, but certainly you can get that book. And really just be a sympathetic ear and somebody to give a good hug, and just allow people to feel what they need to feel, and eventually they get over it themselves naturally. All right, so I'm hoping that that's going to help some of you.